Excellencies, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen. It's my pleasure to welcome you to the high-level dialogue, Harnessing Risk Understanding for a Safer Future. Are we keeping up? I am Haya Al-Qubati, Arab State Regional Focal Point with the Sendai Stakeholder Children and Youth Group, a youth leader, a green champion, passionate about disaster risk reduction and empowering young people for sustainable development. I'll be guiding today's discussion. We're today here to explore the urgent need to improve our understanding of disaster risk reduction and turn that knowledge into actionable insights. We gather at a crucial time as the world faces increasing challenges, from extreme weather events to evolving climate risks that need harness risk data and translate it into better decision-making. Decision-making has never been more crucial. We do not only need to understand these risks, but also to ensure that the right information reaches the right people at the right time and at the right format. In this session, we'll be reflecting on a question such as, what are the biggest barriers to effective risk understanding? How can government, stakeholders, and partners strengthen collective capacity to understand current and future risks? How can we ensure that risk knowledge is translated into policies and investment that drive resilient development? Here's today's session will unfold. We'll start with a short introductory video to set the scene for our discussion, and then we'll hear the keynote remarks from His Excellency President Surenjel Whips Jr., the President of Republic of Palau. Following that, I'll be moderating a panel discussion featuring distinguished leaders from around the world who will offer insight on risk understanding and governance from various regional and sectorial perspectives. Throughout this session, I encourage you to share your thoughts and insights via Slido, whether you're joining us in person or virtually. Your contributions are vital, and we will be dedicating time at the end for interactive Q&A. And finally, we will open the floor for the questions again. All right, as you listen in, if something resonates, a powerful quote, a key insight, or even a call for action, do not hesitate to share it on your network, on social media. Use the hashtag #ActForResilienceToday and hashtag #EverydayCounts. Before we get started, let's take a moment to watch a brief video on the screen that will help frame our discussion today.
My name is Zera, and I was born in a small village in 2025. So you want to know what my childhood was like? Heat, that's what I remember. My brothers and sisters, we were always sick. Too much sun and not enough food. We missed so many days of school. Baba, my father, he finally just pulled us all out because he could not afford the school fees. I remember my 16th birthday. It was the hottest day I ever knew. Mama and Teta, my mother and grandmother, they both collapsed and were taken to hospital with heat stroke. Teta, she never came home. Then there were the droughts. Every few years they came, and each time they were worse than the one before. Baba's crops and our animals, all gone. We had to leave the farm and move here to the city. Every day, I have to search for work, taking anything I can get. Oh, how I dream of my village. My name is Zera. I was born in a small village in 2025. I had a happy childhood. Our village was bursting with life, but my word, it was hot. But we usually stayed cool in our home thanks to the government and all the things they did to help us build cooler houses, plant trees, and preserve rainwater. Invest in resilience, live better. That was the slogan they always used to say. My father, he learned new ways to farm, planting crops that didn't need so much water. We always had enough to eat, and me and my siblings all finished school. Now Baba is retired, and the farm is mine. And my daughter is now studying at the university. And me, I teach all the children in our village how to nurture the land and how to live with the heat.
So what might Zara's life hold? Knowledge of risk and how to reduce it is the bedrock of sustainable development and the key to unlocking Zara's future and ours. With rising climate threats, cascading hazards and growing vulnerabilities,
we need quality risk data, clear models and the capacity to use them.
But gaps remain. We must close the digital divide and improve how we collect and use data. When paired with finance, capacity development and implementation support, it can empower communities like Zara's to shape disaster-resilient futures. Advances in technology and modelling give us better foresight. We can map cascading interconnected risks more clearly than ever. But knowledge only matters if it enables action by government officials, local leaders, communities, farmers, teachers and families. We must scale up solutions now to reduce volatility and ensure equal access to information, technology and finance. The future depends on the decisions we make today, and good decisions begin with understanding risk.
Thank you for that powerful reminder. As the video stated, understanding risk is the first step to transforming them into opportunities, urging us all to turn risk knowledge into safer, more resilient societies. Now, I'm thrilled to introduce our keynote speaker for today, His Excellency, President Surangel Whips Jr. of the Republic of Palau. We're honored to hear his insights on how governments and stakeholders can enhance their collective capacity to understand risk and translate it into meaningful action for sustainable development. His Excellency, welcome. Please, the floor is yours.
Excellencies, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, Ali, and warm greetings from Palau. It is truly an honor to be here today, and let me begin by thanking the UN Office for Disaster Risk Reduction and the government of Switzerland for convening this dialogue. Our theme, Every Day Counts, Act for Resilience Today, resonates deeply with us in Palau. Rising seas, unpredictable weather, saltwater intrusion, and coastal erosion. These aren't just projections for us. They are the daily realities that we see and live. Our homes, our food sources, our infrastructure are all under threat. Take, for example, the island of Sonsoro. The highest point on that island is only 2 meters above sea level. It is facing submersion due to sea level rise. And if it disappears, we lose more than the land. We lose a community, its culture, its traditions, and its language. That isn't a future scenario. That's what's happening now. You know, Palau lies outside the tropical cyclone zone, but yet we've had 3 disasters recently. Bofa, which caused the storm surge that wiped out the whole east coast of Palau. Haiyan, which destroyed every home and the school on one of our northern islands. And then Typhoon Surigay, most recently, which destroyed 1,500 homes, which if you think of a population of 20,000, it's significant. These once rare events are now becoming alarmingly frequent and intense. But the risk doesn't stop with storms. Saltwater intrusion now claims 6% of our taro crops every year, threatening not only food security, but also our cultural lifeways. We, unfortunately, rely heavily on imported food, and disruptions in the global supply chains, whether from pandemics or conflict, hit us hard. Tourism, which is a cornerstone of our economy, faces a double exposure, not only from natural disasters, which have caused our coral reefs to bleach, the famous jellyfish, stingless jellyfish that you swim with to disappear. We're also hit by the global shocks of the pandemics, which have caused major economic contractions. But then you add that to having droughts, which then tell us visitors can't come to Palau because we don't have water to take care of them. We have to ask ourselves, are we keeping up? And the honest answer is no. Risk is growing faster than our capacity to understand it, prepare for it, and reduce it. We have the tools, but we must bridge the gap between knowledge and action urgently. To build true resilience, we must treat risk as something to be proactively managed. Ensure our metrics are inclusive, relevant for both present and future generations, and move beyond one-off projects towards sustained investments in national and community capacity, supporting initiatives like what we've launched in the whole Pacific, which is called the Pacific Resilience Facility. They deserve robust support. Just an example, Japan has been a critical partner in supporting Palau with the launch of AM broadcasting systems, which during our last typhoon, we understood how important it was, because without it, we could not help warn the thousands of people that were getting impacted. High-frequency radios, multi-hazard early warning sirens, and automatic weather stations have all helped us build and be more resilient. These are real, tangible investments in preparedness, and this is the kind of partnership we need more of. In Palau, we're integrating that scientific data with traditional wisdom of our elders and local leaders and fisherfolk, with a marine spatial planning process that we hope to build our sustainable ocean plan, which is rooted in cross-sectoral, stakeholder-led collaboration. We believe that blending science and traditional knowledge is essential for meaningful preparedness and resilience. And too often, that data, risk data, is trapped in institutions detached from practical decision-making. In Palau, risk information now informs us in agricultural planning, budget allocations, and even critical priorities, like due to our LIDAR study that has been conducted, we know that our hospital, schools, and of course communities are at risk. So in planning for the future, move them to higher ground. And this all contributes to our overall resilience. Finally, let me address a pressing injustice that we need to address. Palau is sometimes classified as a high-income country based solely on GDP. But this ignores a deeper truth. Many of our people live in income poverty, and these disasters push them further into that. We face profound socio-economic vulnerability, and we cannot let GDP alone determine our eligibility for support. We urge that the MVI be used to ensure a more just and accurate measure of our economic reality. Resilience isn't but built in moments of crisis. It's built every day in the decisions we make about where we live, where we grow, how we educate our children, and where we invest in infrastructure. It's built on trust between governments and communities and partners, and it's built when we stop viewing disaster risk reduction as a response and embrace it as a shared global responsibility. Because truly, every day counts, and the time to act for resilience is now. Komal Msula, thank you.
We have to ask ourselves again, are we keeping up? What a great reminder. Thank you, President Whips, for your inspiring words. Before we continue, please let me remind all the participants in the room that the next segment will have intervention in French in case you need interpretation. Please collect the interpretation devices available at the entrance of the room. As we continue this conversation, we would like to invite you all to participate in a quick poll through Slido. We're eager to hear your thoughts. In a quick poll through Slido, okay, what you have to do is basically scan the QR code on the screen or entering the Slido code in the Slido whip. And I would also like to grab your attention. Please be aware the same Slido slide will also be submitting the same question to the panelist. So for now, you can answer the poll. And then throughout the session, you can submit your questions. Feel free to ask whatever questions, short and concise, that will be directed to our panelists. I will read now out loud the question, which says, which of the following do you think are the biggest barriers to effective risk understanding? A, lack of quality data. B, access to technology to collect better data. C, analytical capabilities to derive insight from data. D, poor risk communication. E, data governance. I will now repeat the question again. Which of the following do you think are the biggest barriers to effective risk understanding? Lack of quality data, access to technology to collect better data, or analytical capabilities to derive insight from data, or poor risk communication, and finally, is it data governance? I can still see the poll is doing the math. All right, thank you for your participating in this poll. We try to make this session as interactive as possible. And we have seen that it was the lack of quality data. And of course, without reliable, up-to-date, and context-specific data, we simply cannot understand who or what is most at risk, let alone respond effectively. Now that we have heard from the president of Palau, let's take a deep dive into the conversation with our distinguished panelists. I'm pleased to introduce each of them. His Excellency Mr. Leon Lundy, the State Minister for Disaster Risk Management from the Bahamas. His Excellency Dr. Riditya Jati, Deputy Minister of System and Strategy at Indonesia National Disaster Management Authority. Mr. Dimitri Mariasan, Deputy Executive Secretary of the United Nations Economic Commission for Europe. Her Excellency, Dr. Najla Boudon, Co-Chair of the Science and Technology Advisory Group on UNDRR, Arab States. And finally, joining us virtually, Ms. Nadia Rahman, Member of the Planning Commission, Ministry of Planning, Development and Special Initiative from Pakistan. I will start with a couple of questions, a round of questions, and I would like to start with His Excellency Mr. Leon Lundy from the Bahamas. Mr. Lundy, let's start with you. From the Caribbean context and your leadership role in disaster risk management, what are some emerging good practices in assessing disaster impact and improving our understanding of risks today and for the future generations as well?
Thank you, Ms. Agobadi. When we talk about disaster impacts, it's easy to focus on the numbers. How much infrastructure was damaged, what the losses add up to in dollars. But those numbers don't tell the full story. They don't show us the everyday things that truly sustain a community, like people's health, their sense of safety, their ability to stay connected, their cultural identity. And if we want to build resilience that lasts, we have to take the full picture into account, not just what's damaged, but what's disrupted in people's lives and what that means for their future. A promising shift is the recognition of non-economic losses. This includes trauma and mental health effects, the loss of cultural heritage, displacement, and the erosion of community cohesion. These dimensions of disaster impact have historically been overlooked, yet they shape recovery trajectories. Good assessments today are also paying more attention to what is impacted, not just how. Youth, persons with disabilities, and marginalized groups experience disaster differently, including their voices helps ensure the solutions are more just and more effective. Earlier this year, we named our first disaster risk reduction youth ambassadors, Kiana Roll of Exuma and Gabriel Sanders of New Providence. These 10th graders have changed and charged with bridging the gap, being both a voice for DRR amongst their peers and being a voice for their generation within DRR. Earlier in their tenure, these young leaders corrected our course, steering us away from school special assemblies toward youth roundtables, where we could hear the thoughts and fears of our other 10th graders. As you know, young people are dialed in and they want to be heard, and we must listen. Another promising direction is the move toward community-centric approaches. These methods bring local actors, native knowledge, into the design and implementation of risk assessments, recognizing them as agents of insight and change rather than passive recipients of aid. In conclusion, it's really quite simple. When we look beyond the numbers and focus first and foremost on the lived experience of real people, we make better decisions. That's how we build resilience, not just in systems, but in lives. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Your Excellency, for those valuable reflections. We now turn to our next speaker, His Excellency Dr. Raditya Jati from Indonesia. Dr. Jati, Indonesia is a data-rich environment when it comes to hazards and risk. But how do we ensure that this wealth of information is not only collected, but also reaches local communities in formats they can use, understand, and act on?
Thank you, Hai, and distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. It's a very honor for us from Indonesia to share what we have done. And since 2012, we have what we call the risk mapping and also the data that have been incorporated with other land ministry. Since 2016, we have what we call the platform of INARIS, where people can also access the data information from national until the local level. In 2022, when the global platform for disaster risk reduction was held in Bali, at that time our president mentioning about sustainable resilience. Sustainable resilience is about people-centered approach where innovation of data, information, science, and technology must put into from national to local level. Also, how we can really see the people-centered approach is a very important thing, how we can really bridge the national and local gaps through the localization of risk data. Indonesia recognized the rich data information as a real challenge as an archipelagic state. We have 17,000 islands. We have more than 127 volcanoes active. We have 400 more fault lines that have actively in Indonesia. So we're more hazard-prone area, where there is complex risk information, which is a systemic risk, which is collateral and cascading impact. We have also strengthening the collaboration between national agency and local government and community-based organization to ensure that risk information is tailored with the local language and certain context of capacities. The production of knowledge is also important, how we can really promote the people-centered approach. It is also important that involving the local communities, local knowledge, traditional knowledge to design the early warning message, risk communication materials to ensure the relevance of cultural appropriate of information share. early warning to early action and real action. This is what we have now. Multi-channel of dissemination strategies is also put into place, while Indonesia has utilized the range of platform for official application, SMS alert, also the community radio, social media, religious network and traditional method to ensure the inclusivity of, especially to remote digitally unserved population, including small islands that have in Indonesia. The raise of the capacity of the people of the community is very important for us. That's why the role of the local government and the DRR volunteers is important. We have a program, what we call the Resilience Village program since 2012, and we still have much of homework where people living in the hazard-prone area, including the people that living with the more hazard. Now we have to see that local government empower disaster resilience village, working with other network, with other partners, organization, not only the government. And we have to serve the first mile of communication and of risk information to ensure that timely action before the disaster risk. Thank you.
Thank you. We're grateful for your remarks, Your Excellency. I now invite Mr. Dimitri Mariuson, the Deputy Executive Secretary of the UNECE. We often hear the phrase data as a public good. From your perspective, what role can global standard, data governance principles, and frameworks play in ensuring risk data is responsibly managed to support resilience and sustainable development?
Good morning. Thank you very much. It's a pleasure for me to represent the UN Economic Commission for Europe at this important meeting. UNECE brings 56 countries from 3 continents, and our focus is norms and regulations, standards, including on official statistics. But before I turn to statistics, let me share with you a few key insights on the question that was raised with you by you, Madam Moderator. First, risk data has to be a public good. We heard from the distinguished President, His Excellency Mr. President, that often risk data is trapped away from those who are on the ground. We need to change that, and at UNECE we are very proud to host a number of tools that do exactly that. One is the Aarhus Convention, which is a rarely mentioned convention in the context of disaster risk reduction, but one that is extremely important. This is a tool that allows citizens to have access to information related to the environment. So when a nuclear power plant is being built, citizens in the villages surrounding the sites, and many of those living far away, need to know what are the risks. And this information provided on the open by design and by default principle has to be provided with transparency. Our Water Convention strengthens this approach across borders, where countries are enabled to share information at transboundary basin management, again, very often, crucially, reducing the risks of disaster. The Industrial Accidents Convention, about which I'll talk a bit more later, is another tool which allows countries to immediately share information when a disaster hits an industrial facility. By the way, now applicable to many countries around the world. It started here in Switzerland when a major explosion at a chemical plant started affecting countries around Switzerland, because rivers do not know borders. Now, this is not enough, though, to have access to data and sharing of data. The quality of data has to be there, and this is where data governance is so important. We host the Conference of European Statisticians, which is one of the main European bodies to create data standards and statistical standards, informing how statistical offices around the world tackle this. And the universal fundamental principles of official statistics are the guiding set of principles there. Now, do disaster risk reduction agencies know how to use them? Do statistical offices talk enough to disaster risk reduction offices? And do we have unbiased, high quality, interoperable, inclusive data on disasters? Well, the biggest good news is that together with UNDRR, UN Statistical Division, other regional commissions, there is now a blueprint for global common framework on disaster-related statistics, which is incorporating the Sendai principles and actually addressing the specific data gaps that are out there in developing countries when it comes to collecting data on hazardous events, disaster risk, impact, and integration of data across sectors with multiple sources of data, including increasingly big data and user-generated data, becoming part of how the governments collect, distribute, and apply, use data in their daily work. And I will speak more about this in the second part. Thank you.
Many thanks for your insightful contribution. I now have the pleasure of giving the floor to Her Excellency Dr. Najla. Let's turn to the persistent gap between science, policy, and action. From your region, what are some concrete good practices that help bridge this divide and ensure risk knowledge leads to real, on-the-ground resilience?
Thank you, Hannah. Merci beaucoup. Je vais parler en français. Merci beaucoup pour cette.
Thank you very much. I'm going to speak in French. Thank you for this crucial question. As was underlined by the Sendai Framework, it is important to emphasize the link between science, policy, and its application. Let's stay honest. There has been a lot of progress at the international level, but we have noticed that inequalities persist between regions, sectors, whether public or private, or even those different levels in one country, and the national capacity itself. We have tried to deploy an integration to be able to transform strategically these interventions. Over the past different years, there have been many projects implemented within this strategy to have a joint and coherent action based on the inspiring experiences that we will talk about here, but that come from Libya, Algeria, Morocco on the ground. We're trying to take into account and to use science within the decision process and the actions that are being implemented, particularly the institutionalization of data banks, data coming from the public sector. We need to have better still governance and use of technological platforms, scientific data that is accessible not only to the practitioners but decision makers. A second thing that we're trying to take advantage of is community involvement in the co-creation of the implementation of decentralized practices for risk reduction, also mechanisms such as those that are financial, economic, that are also based on data and science and easily quantifiable. This science and these data have to be translated into a message that is comprehensible at all different levels, particularly that of citizens. I would like to insist on one point, is that the systematic association of the university with these different components is no longer an option, but absolutely essential in our strategy. Regardless of a high level of diplomacy, scientific information and its work is still segmented and in silos. We don't see a lot of integrated expertise at a high level in academia, and it is not helping us to test innovative solutions within the community itself. Thank you.
Your Excellency. To continue our discussion, I now move to Ms. Nadia Rahman from Pakistan. What is the experience from Pakistan in ensuring risk knowledge is considered in the planning and budgeting decisions to manage, minimize, and prevent current and future risks? If you can please confirm that you can hear us, Ms. Nadia?
Yes. Am I audible? Yes.
Yes, now you may start, please. The floor is yours.
I'd like to thank the United Nations Office of Disaster Risk Reduction and the government of Switzerland for hosting this important panel. So for a country that's highly vulnerable to impacts of climate change and is For a country that is highly vulnerable and is also fiscally constrained, it is extremely imperative for the government to use data-based decisions, evidence-based planning to target our limited fiscal resources. So to come to your question, how is disaster risk knowledge incorporated in local, regional, and national planning? So the way the Planning Commission and the government of Pakistan has responded to this is, one is digital data governance. That is the bedrock that would inform the public financial management frameworks. And then also the disaster risk finance frameworks. So for digital data governance, the data that we are using right now, it comes at several layers. The first layer is satellite data. The second is with radars, automatic weather stations, early warning systems, which we have deployed now in the Western Belt also, which earlier had a blind spot, and also across the Eastern Belt of Pakistan. And the third layer is with gauges, physical gauges, using telemetry stations that give you live information on flows, hydrological levels, flows of water through floods and at various stations. So, and this is where transboundary data sharing also comes into play. We are, with rising populations and intensifying climate change, our region is facing mounting stress on shared natural resources. And I'd like to underscore the importance of cross-boundary cooperation and treaties, which are important in sharing timely data for disaster risk reduction, such as the Indus Water Treaty, which predates the UN Convention on Water by about 37 years. It came into force in 1960. It took about 8 years to negotiate. It formed a blueprint for the UN Water Convention to come later in the 1997. It established the bedrock important principles, such as the principle of no harm. And Article 6 of that treaty mandates that the participants of the treaty, the signatories to the treaty, share timely data information. And so these are the several sources of data that inform our national catastrophe model, which has been developed at the National Disaster Risk Management Fund. And that is what we use at the Planning Commission for making investment decisions on public infrastructure. So if you're to construct a dam or to construct a road or to approve a food security project, we would look at the coordinates of that project, generate based on the coordinates, and with using probabilistic modeling, we would be able to generate a hazard profile and then determine if it's suitable or not for the certain location, and what are the appropriate approaches that we can use. If it's in a water-stressed area and it's an agriculture project, we bring in regenerative agriculture, less water-intensive practices, and then approve crops which are not as water-hungry, so that we make planning decisions as per the climate or hazard risk profile of the program that we are approving it in. So this is at a planning stage. And the other, and another would be, for example, it's earlier we talked about connection with communities. So if it is a school meal program, rather than a lot of our school meal programs earlier used to be just a distribution of packaged foods to schools. Now we're shifting from that towards regenerative farming or school gardening, kitchen gardening, and farm to school kind of interventions. So we've introduced a climate lens into the public financial management and approval of all projects in the country that are approved by the public sector. So the public sector this brings me to this third part. The first was data governance. The second is climate proofing of public financial management. And the third is disaster risk finance. There is only so much that the government can do in terms of disaster preparedness and disaster recovery, because the costs for adaptation for Pakistan, it's 348 billion, the cost for adaptation. And becoming resilient by the year 2030, the World Bank estimates that we need 348 billion. And only so much of that can come through raising taxes and government funds and debt and fiscal consolidation. We have to look at other sources of finance. So that brings us towards a coherent disaster risk finance strategy and a blended finance strategy. So our disaster risk finance strategy, we are using climate risk modeling to inform it. So what happened in the floods of 2022, which was a 1 in a 100 year, a 1 in a 1,000 year kind of an event, Pakistan faced economic losses which were equivalent to entire exports of the country. So the contraction of the GDP was substantial. We lost about 30 billion in dollars. So, and then the banking sector retracted and reduced financing in exactly where the vulnerabilities were. So the disaster risk finance strategy of Pakistan now looks at disaster risk retention, where the government allocates funds in the event of a disaster for social protection, so that in the event of a disaster, development funds do not have to be, or disaster preparedness funds do not have to be redirected from development into recovery. So we have ring-fenced as a part of our National Disaster Risk Management Fund finances for disaster risk retention. And then we've also introduced disaster risk transfer instruments. And an example of that is the Climate Risk Facility. The Climate Risk Facility is to, in the event of a disaster, after a qualifying event, which is determined by a trigger, which is based on comprehensive disaster risk modeling. It identifies the trigger. The government releases funds to the microfinance banks, and the microfinance banks increase on lending to farmers or agriculture communities or flood-impacted areas where for contingent disaster risk loans. So this improves the adaptation ability. And this climate risk facility comes in two parts. One is before a risk, before a flood or a disaster happens, they transfer and train farmers on climate smart practices, less water intensive practices, and adoption of technologies which prepare them better in the event of a disaster. So the first part of this climate risk facility is preparedness, and the second, in the event of a risk of a disaster, credit is eased for the target groups. And this climate risk facility is informed by it's informed by climate risk planning that is used to identify all the indices, what the triggers are, what the parametric insurance indices are, and also in terms of the impact on economic losses, so that the level of funds that have to be allocated are based on evidence. So our response to disaster preparedness is systemic in terms of addressing the data requirements at all 4 tiers, developing digital data governance, then climate screening of our public financial management, and then finally a coherent disaster risk finance strategy to be able to finance recovery and preparedness efforts. So thank you.
We deeply appreciate your perspective. Now let's move to a couple of questions, and we truly appreciate your presence, Mr. Londi. Okay, so how can we better understand the multiple crises and compounding risks which are overwhelmingly present today, rather than focusing on understanding the individual hazards and risks?
Good morning again, and thank you for the question. Hazards do not occur in isolation. In the Bahamas and across our region, we see how one event can trigger a host of new challenges, intersecting and intensifying and generating a volatility that ripples outward. This interconnectedness is especially visible in small island contexts like the Bahamas, where compounding shocks can quickly escalate into cascading crises. To stay ahead of these shocks, we have to think bigger, and it's bigger than just the storm itself. We need to understand how risks connect and how these connections affect real lives. One of the first steps is shifting our focus from the hazard itself to the broader system it disrupts. When a hurricane knocks out electricity, that affects hospitals, food storage, telecommunications, and public safety. For example, a hurricane may devastate critical infrastructure, which then limits healthcare delivery during a pandemic, which in turn slows economic recovery, and I'm sure everybody knows that sounds familiar. That ripple effect shows us we are not dealing with a single threat, but a chain of connected impacts. We need risk tools that reflect this reality. Multi-hazard mapping and impact-based forecasting help us see where risks overlap, where the same vulnerable community might face storm surge, economic fragility, and limited access to healthcare. This kind of analysis helps us make smarter, more targeted decisions. But data is limited in understanding the real live nuances of these events. We also need the insights of vulnerable and impacted people. They understand how these risks play out day to day. Including community knowledge in our risk assessments ensures that national strategies are rooted in lived experience and not just satellite images or spreadsheets. And finally, we have to work across sectors and silos. Ministries of health, education, planning, and finance must come to the same table. If the risks are connected, then our responses must be connected too. Ultimately, better understanding of compounding risks gives us the ability to anticipate not just the shocks themselves, but the ways it will reverberate through society. When we connect the dots between hazards and their consequences, we put ourselves in a stronger position to protect lives, stabilize communities, and respond with the speed and the coordination that modern crises demand. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Now I move to His Excellency Dr. Raditya. I would like to ask, how are the advances in geospatial information, risk modeling, strategic foresighting, artificial intelligence being applied to better understand risk now and for future generations as well?
Thank you also for the question. I would like to also reiterate, Excellencies, that breaking the silo is a very important thing. Breaking the silo on climate change, disaster risk reduction, and SDGs must be committed to all of us. Data become information. Information will be analyzed, and analysis is used for strategic and policy making. That's why it's important that application of geospatial and foresight tool is a very important thing. Indonesia has begun exploring the remote sensing and also geospatial analysis support disaster modeling efforts, particularly in such as flood monitoring, land use planning, early warning, while developing this technology to gradually being integrated into national and local risk assessment to improve decision making. In our platform, INARIS, we have 100 times 100 meter pixels that is now usable for the local government, that we have also provided the 1,50,000 scale of hazard map that have been also used for all local government in Indonesia. The urban risk also related to climate foresight. the collaboration with the National Agency Plan of Indonesia and also BNPB, incorporated with strategic foresight to scenario planning into urban resilience strategies, supporting long-term risk-informed development, align the disaster management plan that we have for 25 years since 2020 to 2045. This is beyond 2030. The risk information is also mandated by the law. President decree that every local government must have as a minimum standard services of risk information. This is a mandatory for all local government, including 38 provinces and 514 districts in the countries. Under this smart city program, we also have like city in Jakarta, Surabaya, Bandung, Semarang, piloting resilience program and making city resilience campaign until 2030. The dashboard is also a real-time hazard monitoring and decision support tools to respond flood, air quality, extreme heat, and challenges. For regional and global partnership for innovation, we are working also with the ASEAN Agreement on Disaster Management and Emergency Response on ADMER, committed and AHA Center, which also the international collaboration with the other ASEAN countries to provide the data information in real-time data. The collaboration also with APEC Emergency Preparedness Working Group, G20 Disaster Risk Reduction Working Group, BRICS Disaster Risk Reduction Working Group also provide how we can really see and sharing each other how the knowledge disaster data can be used as a strategic program and for policy making. For future-proofing that through youth and academia is very important. We are investing the youth innovation challenges, university partnership, and also to use the open data platform to stimulate a local solution for evolving urban risks, recognizing the future generation must be also co-creator for resilience. So that's why how we can really deal with the diverse of multi-stakeholders group and how we can really see that inclusiveness is very important, related under the risk data that can be used for all of us. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Now I move to Mr. Dimitri. I would like you to summarize in 3 minutes what role do risk, impact, and resilience metrics play in driving resilience, please.
Thank you. So in the first part, I spoke about the legal instruments, the conventions that give access to information. I spoke about the principles of official statistics and the global framework for disaster-related statistics. We've accomplished this. This is an important public good that we all should be using. Now, what do we do with real-life complex challenges that do not often fit in the frameworks that are being developed by governments or the UN or other multilateral bodies? For example, I was recently in Central Asia. What do we do with the risk of uranium and other hazardous chemicals tailings? You know, the risk of spilling into water and affecting thousands of communities, putting lives at risk, is not easily captured by one statistical indicator or one category. What do we do more generally with NATEC risks? I'm sure there will be a lot of talk about NATEC during the global platform. And with climate change exacerbating the risks of already highly risk-prone areas to now suffer also from the results of human activity. That is further exacerbated in a conflict setting. Well, right now, many conflicts around the world, among them in our region, the conflict in Ukraine, where we see industrial facilities constantly a threat, and that is on top of multiple climate hazards that have already been there before. Finally, here in Europe, in what is considered a well-prepared and relatively resilient society, electrical grid stability has recently come into focus. You all saw the massive power outage in Spain and Portugal. What would happen if at the same time there would be a major storm and a major cyber attack and a pandemic happening all at the same time? Would our modern society be prepared for a multi-risk hazard like that? Do we have the data systems? Do we have the interoperability? Do we have a way to share this across the multiple departments that are normally not talking to each other in that sense? So high-quality, interoperable, and inclusive data is what we need. Statistical offices play an important role here. They can use the global framework. They can use the principles of official statistics for disaster risk reduction, but they need a very, very clear input and cooperation from other sectoral bodies. We also need to link it, and I think we heard it clearly from several speakers, including from the distinguished speaker from Pakistan, to link these data sets to investment decisions. If we do not invest where the risks are, if we do not invest in preparedness, if we do not design our infrastructure with these risks in mind, including multiple and complex risk, we are, well, preparing the future generations for a disaster in literal terms. At UNICE, you have developed a number of tools. I will not go into the details now, but I'd like to mention one of them is the International Transport Infrastructure Observatory, which we created together with the Islamic Development Bank, that looks, for example, at how risk-prone, including climate and other risks, are the transport corridors connecting Asia and Europe. You can literally, through GIS-based tool, see the layers of risk, and international financial institutions are already using this tool to make choices about which road to build, which bridge to invest on, and so on. And similar to this GIS-based tool, we need to have every project undertaking a real stress test before making a financial decision on investing in infrastructure, be it transport or energy infrastructure. And again, such a stress testing framework underpinned by a number of clear data points already exists. We have developed it. We encourage all member states to use it going forward. Final point, local level has to be there. We cannot afford to have a global framework or national strategy or national coordinating committee if local communities are not empowered to understand their data, to collect it properly, to include this in their investment decisions as a major factor. We will not be ready for when disasters hit. And I think including disaster risk reduction and voluntary local reviews in local planning and empowering municipalities will be such an important aspect of responding in a way that brings metrics, resilience, and disaster risk reduction together.
Thank you. Now I move again to Dr. Najla. Could you please briefly share an example on the relevance of the behavioral science and risk communication in understanding risk?
Merci beaucoup encore, Aya, pour cette autre question fondamentale.
Thank you again for this very fundamental question. One of the main lessons that we have learned from the recent crises, particularly the COVID-19 crisis, showed that even the best policies, when they are set up on probative data, may not be understood or applied by those who need to implement them. And that's where behavioral science and risk communication comes into play. We need to say mea culpa because we have often considered that this human dimension is secondary, particularly in the development of our national strategies. But they need to supplement scientific approaches by attacking psychosocial factors. Let's understand these mechanisms, the human factor, in order to better target prevention campaigns, to be able to design efficient strategies and reduce the vulnerability of societies facing these risks. We don't need to just reduce vulnerability, but it is also important to think about social justice and social equity. And that is where communication and risk communication that is well thought out comes into play, that it is human-centered, and that it turns towards action and applicability. We have also gone through several steps within our programs and projects at a national level. One example is that there's been a lot of effort to institutionalize the behavioral approach in public policy by setting up a legislative framework so that recognize the importance of their use. Local research applied at a local level was also supported to adapt tools and localize them to their context and to local cultures. And there was also a lot of effort put into education and training at all levels, particularly in young people, those who are educators, leaders, communicators in local communities to be able to make concrete effects. In all of our projects, it's really the will to construct risk communication governance that is inclusive and that integrates the state, scientists, media, civil society, and community in continuous dialogue and exchange. Multisectorial approaches are crucial, and we need to reinforce our physical infrastructures with social and cognitive infrastructure support, mainly using behavioral science with the aim of reducing vulnerability within our societies. It is an ethical question. It is a question of equity, of social justice, and social peace. Thank you.
I now move to Ms. Nadia Rahman. Please, in 3 minutes, if you can summarize, how do we ensure prevention, risk reduction, and adaptation are guiding planning decisions for risk-informed development?
Thank you. One that the government of Pakistan is using is we have, because the needs are many, there are many regions and projects, so there's that require attention. So it's a matter of prioritizing, and to guide prioritization of interventions of the government, we are now using a cost of inaction methodology. So cost of inaction identifies, it's used to quantify economic, environmental, and social consequences of not undertaking a certain program or a certain project. If it helps the government prioritize. One, we look at direct costs, which include the immediate financial losses that are incurred from destruction to physical assets, diminished labor productivity, and infrastructure damage resulting from disasters. And the second, we also look at how the direct costs have an impact on indirect costs. It has a cascading economic and social implication for other sectors, such as productivity and livestock and agriculture. And finally, we look at the opportunity cost of inaction, which revolves around economic growth or investment opportunities that are foregone due to unaddressed climate risks. So we have developed a tool, and right now this is at a sectoral level, and we are improving the granularity of it so that we can bring it down to a regional, so that it's differentiated at a project and a regional level to guide public investment decisions. And not just public investment decisions, we have also developed a blended finance facility called CIFPAC, Climate Investment Facility for Pakistan. And this works with the private sector to bring in investment along with IFC and the British government to bring in investment to promote disaster preparedness and solutions in these specific high priority areas. So a lot of this work would require partnerships between the government, private sector, and making informed decisions because when the private sector gets involved, the stress testing of a particular investment project is extremely important, because private sector is driven by ESG imperatives, yes, but also by profit. So having the risk information in place and using the right de-risking instruments from the government. In this case, we are using de-risking from the British government, it's a bilateral fund which would reduce, which would give first loss guarantees so that the private investment in adaptation is protected. So using climate risk analysis to inform all participants and stakeholders and ensure governance structures which de-risk decisions and improve better coordination to solve these cross-sectoral problems is important. So I would conclude with this, that for us, the guiding strategy has been based on cost of inaction, which identifies what is more time-sensitive and more urgent in terms of preparedness. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Now I would like to open... Now I would like to open the floor for your questions. Whether you're joining us here in person or virtually, please submit your questions via Slido. And just to remind you, as earlier, the same Slido you used to vote the poll, it's the same where you would submit your questions. I'm receiving some questions, and the first one is to Dr. Jati. One of the questions says, how to ensure preparedness is well anchored at the highest level for decision makers? So how do we ensure that preparedness is well anchored at the highest level for decision makers?
Thank you. Thank you for the question. I think this is the most important thing, that one of the priority that we have. As also mentioned, the minimum standard services that is mandatory now for the local government. The first is about risk information that must be used as a services for the local community to understand their risk. The second is about how preparedness must be done by the local authority for the community to understand how preparedness is important. The third is about when the emergency happens, how we can really do the response effectively and efficient. So with this three mandatory, it's important that every local government must have their budget and their program to protect the people and to understand that people must have the access of information and preparedness must be done. Second, we have what we call the National Day for Preparedness. This is every 26th of April, where massively we try to promote and campaign on preparedness and during simulation and drilling. Just this 26th of April, there's more than 6,000 schools doing the simulation together all over Indonesia. And we have the record of International MORI that we have the highest score of 6,000 schools doing together simulation all over Indonesia. And the third is about how preparedness incorporated into the program and other line ministry, including how we can really see, how we can really monitor that preparedness is used and useful and really done all by national level, including the program. Until now, we're putting the master plan of the 25 years. Preparedness is one of the achievements that we have to use and we have to have, and we report it every year to the president. And this is monitored by the dashboard, and we use this monitoring for budget taking and program for other ministry, including the local government, how much budget they include for preparedness. So this is how we prioritize that preparedness is very important for Indonesia as an archipelagic state with many hazards that we have. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Now I would like to ask Mr. Marison. What mechanism can accelerate the translation of risk data into actionable real-time decisions at local and national levels?
Thank you. Thank you very much. Well, we heard many examples, in fact, of national dashboards which are accessible to local and national governments alike. There are good examples of that. We spoke about the need to have a very clear set of classifiers for hazardous events, to even understand what is happening, to be able to define the kind of hazard or risk or a disaster risk, or a disaster occurring, you need to understand what is happening and how to be able to define it and what triggers action in what way, and to do this across different government entities. So hazard profiles is one of the very important elements there. And the third point I'd like to draw your attention to is, as it was mentioned a couple of times when we spoke about strategic foresight. I'll give you one example. In Finland, before any parliamentary election, all parties, irrespective of their political views, are given a set of risk and opportunity scenarios for the future. And these risk profiles, these scenarios for the future, which are underpinned by, well, evidence, by data collected from reliable sources, from civil servants, not politicians, actually then are used as a basis for campaigning. So politicians can draw different conclusions from those risk profiles and scenarios, but it is extremely important that misinformation, that fake data, fake news does not seep into a very sensitive field of risk-based decision-making, because investments will be made that will affect generations to come, and these need to be done in a way that is evidence-based. So, well, I would argue that irrespective of whether a government has or doesn't have a foresight strategy, a foresight unit, this kind of functionality, it goes hand in hand with real risk-informed development and decision-making. And it doesn't matter whether the government is right-wing or left-wing. In Finland and other countries around the world, governments oscillate, but there needs to be a core set of principles and, very, very importantly, describe scenarios of what happens if, and how do we plan our economy and our society for that. And I also really would like to emphasize the point made about cognitive infrastructure, because the way social and cognitive infrastructure complements physical infrastructure will define the way decision makers will act. It starts from schools. So another very important mechanism, in fact, is putting this kind of narrative into education. Just this morning, my son, on the way to school, I was giving him a lift to school, was telling him about his report in school due next week. It's about avalanche. So others are doing earthquakes and others are doing floods and droughts. His responsibility is avalanche, and he's grade 4, he's 8 years old, analyzing risks of avalanche and preparedness techniques. This is the kind of mechanism for translating general concepts into cognitive ability and risk awareness from early age that we need to make part of every education system everywhere. It does not cost you a lot to ask a teacher in a local school, no matter how poor the country, to talk about what is the risk of drought. Make the kids aware of that and make them work on solutions, and perhaps their solutions will be better than the ones we have been able to come up with.
Thank you. There is a question, and I invite all panelists to chime in on this very interesting and universal question. Please keep your questions coming on the Slido. How to stop the silo mentality and encourage a more integrated approach on risk understanding and resilience building? So this question is open to all the panelists. Yes, no, maybe?
May I ask, may I respond to the previous question about earthquakes and so on?
Yeah, sure.
Huh? Can you put it on the screen, please? Is it possible? Bien, je vais essayer de...
Okay, well,
je vais essayer de répondre à
I'll try to answer the question regarding how we can speed up the integration of impacts that are not as common or that are less immediate as others. So I wanted to answer using like another approach related to what's been said on risk and behavioral sciences. I wanted to share with you an experiment that we just lived in Tunisia after the post-earthquake campaign in 2023 in Morocco. These campaigns after earthquakes led to a public thinking regarding risk culture, but also an awareness of the earthquake hazard that is often underrated because these are things that do not happen so much in these places of the world. They only occur about every 100 years. But this example shows, once again, the influence or the role that a well-informed population can play. So to address the cognitive bias, which generally tends to deny the possibility of an event, well, that's where I wanted to congratulate civil society for their incredible work, the Scouts, the young volunteers of the Red Crescent, and of course, all of them being coordinated by the relevant ministries and the civil protection. Thank you very much.
I would like to thank you all for your valuable contributions as we come to the close of this engaging sessions. So I would like to thank all our panelists for these insightful and forward-looking reflections. A few takeaways from today's discussion include collaborative approaches are essential for truly understanding disaster risks and informed decisions and action for a better world. Also, combining scientific knowledge with local experience create a more inclusive and effective way to manage risks. And finally, strong data governance is essential to keep risk-informed, open, and accessible as global public good, ensuring that youth today and future generations can use it to build safer, more resilient communities. This session has demonstrated that while significant challenges remain, we have momentum and proven practices to build upon, whether it's through regional coordination, technology integration, or community engagement. If today's discussion inspired you, we encourage you to share your reflections and key takeaways on social media using the hashtag #HarnessRiskKnowledge and #EverydayCounts to keep this conversation going. Thank you once again for your participation, and please join me in a round of applause to express our appreciation for our distinguished guests.